Coming up on episode 180 of Wheel Bearings, we're joined by Alex Roy, host of the No Parking Podcast, the Autonocast, and lots more. We're driving the 2021 Cadillac Escalade, Genesis GV80, Audi A6 AllRoad Prestige, and Infiniti QX50 Autograph. We talk about big changes at Lotus and a refresh for Tesla before we finish up with a reader question. That's all ahead on episode 180 of Wheel Bearings.
Did you know you can support Wheel Bearings directly? Head to patreon.com/wheelbearingsmedia and you can become a patron today. Your contributions will help fund the platforms and tools we use to bring the podcast to you. And exclusives and improvements are already on the way thanks to your generosity. So if you want to be part of an automotive podcast like no other, head to patreon.com/wheelbearingsmedia. We've updated the Wheel Bearings merch store, and now there's a whole bunch of new choices, new colors, new styles, t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, hats, mugs, travel mugs, stickers, aprons, tote bags, you name it. You can get your Wheel Bearings merch at shop.wheelbearings.media. Go check it out. That's shop.wheelbearings.media.
This is Wheel Bearings. I'm Dan Roth from Forbes.
I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Guidehouse Insights.
I'm Rebecca Lindland from Rebecca Drives.
And we have a guest this week.
It's your turn.
Okay, I'm Alex Roy, a friend to Dan, Rebecca, and Sam, a fan of Wheel Bearings for a long time. It's nice to be invited in a show where you have a friendly invitation. And should I say what I guess what I do? Right?
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, you're not just a friend of Wheel Bearings.
Who the hell is Alex Roy?
Well, thanks for having me on the show. To be clear, my day job is Director of Special Operations at Argo AI, although I do not represent Argo on my appearance on Wheel Bearings today. But I'm also a columnist at Ground Truth, which is the educational site set up by Argo AI to tell the truth about autonomous vehicles and actually how the technology will propagate. And I co-host the No Parking Podcast with Argo AI CEO Brian Selesky, which is meant to have honest conversations around AI and self-driving. And that's why Sam has been on the show and why I'm so thrilled to be on Wheel Bearings today.
Isn't there another show that you also do?
You're referring to Autonocast, which is the unscripted.
As long as you're here, you might as well plug it.
And the Autonocast is the unscripted circus that I co-founded and co-host with Edward Niedermeyer of the PAVE organization, which is, again, an educational organization around autonomous vehicles, and Kirsten Korosek, who was just promoted to
transportation editor, I think,
at TechCrunch, and who is, like yourselves, one of the few credible journalists covering this sector. So I feel like my boat, but my boat rises when I'm, engaged with you fine people.
Incredible. I think I just get the contact high from Sam and Rebecca.
That's how I feel.
Incredible journalism.
Great. Glad to be here, everybody. Thanks. I love your show.
Well, thank you. Do you sit through like the entire episode, like in one sitting? Do you do the whole episode? Because we've been kind of long lately. So
you mean Wheel Bearings? Yeah. Certainly, it'd never be true of any show that I host. I can never listen or watch myself. I put things on like Wheel Bearings and Doug DeMuro in the background as I'm doing other stuff. And then if I hear something that catches me, I will sit down, rewind 15 seconds. I'm on to that.
Nice.
So, how much time do we have to listen to podcasts? You have to pick like 3 or 4, and that's it.
Yeah. Well, I like the.
You should see my subscription list in Pocket Casts. I have about 90 odd shows in my subscription list. Some of those, probably about a third of those, are currently either retired or on hiatus, but I leave them in there just in case. Every once in a while, some of them pop back up again. But I have about 50 or 60 shows that I listen to on a regular basis.
But you can't. How?
I used to be able to when I was commuting.
Empty nester?
I would commute 90 miles a day, so I had plenty of time in the car. Now I'm not commuting, so I have to invent excuses to go be in the car because otherwise, I'm writing or I'm doing something where I can't split my attention that way. If I write and listen to a podcast, I start typing the transcript. So I need to do something else. But yeah, I actually just finished yesterday taking the dog back and forth to the groomer, the Jason Torchinsky episode of No Parking, which is fantastic.
He's lovely and special. You wish that there were more people. I mean, he's a true polymath, because he can illustrate the ideas in his head, which is really a gift, and I wish I had that gift.
Yeah, well, he's really entertaining to listen to as well. He's very, very sharp about. His book was what you were talking about too. So that's a good one. If anybody in our audience is looking for another show to check out, start there.
What's the name of the book and the podcast again?
The book is Robot Take the Wheel and the Lost Art of Driving. And the podcast is the Jason Torchinsky episode of No Parking. The most interesting thing I learned from his book and talking to him is that if one is trying to look back on the history of automation in transportation and draw a direct line from autonomous vehicle development today back to, I guess, thinkers of the past, Torchinsky. Well, the most fantastical example of ancient autonomy would be the concept of a magic carpet that you could summon and it would find its way to you, and then you could command it to take you places, and it would do so magically and perfectly. But the first real world design was Da Vinci's cart. And he was I think Torchinsky is the first person to cite that as the first example of an automated or semi-automated vehicle. And he found sketches of it, and apparently someone designed a working model of it a few years ago. So it's an interesting read, and there's pictures of it. I'd like someone to find the working model from Italy and take that to the DARPA challenge.
Well, you can probably 3D print one now.
I'll put the link to that episode of the show, and also a link to his book in the show notes. So if anybody's looking, you can just click right there and get right to it. I remember the first time I met Jason was a few years ago at the SAE World Congress when he did a talk there. You were there as well, Alex, and that was a fascinating talk that he did. Yeah,
he's one of my favorite authors, regardless of sort of platform.
Well, one of my favorite things that Jason's been doing of late is this whole saga with the Changli EV.
Yes, I talked about that with Peter Egan. Which,
oh, did you?
Yeah, just
it's kind of a modern day take on the Isetta.
Yeah, well, it's the same kind of concept. Yeah.
Yeah, the episode the video that Jason did with Sandy Monroe with the Changli was hysterical.
I watched that as well. So now that we've sent everybody away from our podcast to listen to other things,
Kraken.
Let's conclude the audience development section by just shouting out our newest patrons. So we've gotten a couple of blind spot monitors. Our friend Chuck Goolsby, who's been a podcast listener, commenter since like the Autoblog days. So welcome, Chuck. Steve Dito also kicked in on Patreon. And then we've got some Forward Collision Alert folks, Mark and Will Randolph. Will is another one who's a long-term friend in the business. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for your support. I hope it's worth it. Moving on.
It's worth it. I love this show. I wouldn't do Beyond if I didn't actually love this show.
Good. That's the high standards. Excellent. So let's talk about what we're driving, because we were sort of talking about that a little bit before we decided to just start recording. And I think given the contrast that you pointed out, Alex, you need to go first and tell us about your latest time behind the wheel.
Well, I daily drive a Tesla Model 3, and I love it. Despite it has all kinds of problems, but I love the car. But recently took out of storage my father's old car, a 1987 Porsche 911 Targa, which is in about as mint condition as one can find such a car. Sam, you've driven it, pretty sorted out, right?
It's awesome, yeah.
And so I just moved to Miami, and I've been driving the Targa for a few days, and it is amazing how much my driving skills have declined after 2 years of Tesla ownership. My driving skills are not at all what they used. Like, I'm just so used to I'm using radar cruise control, but specifically autopilot and the lane keeping functionality, which for all its safety flaws, is pretty good when it works. That I find myself in the Porsche cruising and wanting to repeatedly look down at my phone and then realizing that is the most dangerous thing I could possibly do. And wow, I think we're going to see like 5 years from now when every car's got just ubiquitous driver assistance that's decent. People who drive older cars you're not going to want to get into an older car because your skill decrement's going to be really bad, really bad.
Oh, that makes me so sad.
And I'm not saying I'm a great driver, but I thought I was attentive, and I just, I'm getting older and I see my skills going down. I can see it.
Well, I think it's not just older cars too. I mean, how we define an older car is 5 to 7 years old because they don't have all that ADAS.
Speak for yourself.
Well, no, I mean, but for I'm talking about the general public. Yeah. I'm talking about our listening public. And, we get a lot of, I think all four of us get a lot of questions about what car should I buy, from my teenager or for my mom or for myself. And it's one of the things that I always talk to people about to say, you've got to understand, like, a car that is a 2014 could be a completely different animal than a car that's a 2015 and 16 and 17. And so it's something that people need to be aware of, especially because the average age of the cars on the road today is like 11 years old, 12 years old. So when you go to buy, if you're buying a used car, you just have to be aware of what's in there. I'm not talking about fabulous vintage antique cars, by all means.
But like a Miata.
Certainly for mainstream cars.
Exactly.
For mainstream cars, you're right. If you go from a 12, 15-year-old car, and even if you buy a used car, you're probably going to be going to a 7 or 8-year-old car or maybe a 5-year-old car. And that change is going to be pretty dramatic, probably, a lot more dramatic than, when you went from whatever you had before, that 12-year-old car, to that one.
Right.
We've had so much change in technology in the last decade, and that is one of the big risks that we're going to have, is this atrophying of our driving skills. And this is, we all, at least the three of us, drive new cars all the time. And so, we're constantly experiencing this, and, I try to get back into my Miata as frequently as I can, just to drive,
remind yourself what physics are.
Yes.
Exactly. Well, and that was what I was going to ask you, Alex, is, how extreme is that contrast of being so close to the machine? I can't think of a car that puts you as in touch with the machinery, maybe like a Lotus Elise or something.
Right. Actually, a new Lotus is probably about the same. Right?
Yeah. Like the 911, especially that generation of 911, like it hums with the energy of the engine, and you just feel everything up the steering column and everything, versus the Model 3, which is a lot more isolated. So,
well, I can tell you this. My father said to me when I was in high school, and I said, "Oh, Dad, I really want to own a car like yours someday." He's like, "Your left leg's going to hurt, and both your arms are going to be strong, and your back's going to hurt, and you're not going to be able to carry anything." But specific to the ergonomics, all those things are true. My left leg hurts, my arms, and it's a very uncomfortable car, and it doesn't even have power steering. I mean, nothing. And my dad, he always complained about his Porsche, and then loved getting into his 77 Cadillac Fleetwood, which he owned until the day he died in 2000. And now suddenly I understand it. I understand the desire to have power everything and comfort everything. But derailing our episode,
standard operating procedure.
Yeah,
I went to visit several car dealerships recently to help a family member buy a car. And, the budget was $30,000 or under, small crossover. And, my first question going in, the guy's like, "Oh, are you familiar with the Mazda brand?" I'm like, "Listen, bro, does it have radar cruise control?" And he's like, "Well, it has adaptive cruise control." And then I knew this whole thing was going off the rails. And I feel like a lot of people going in the door, people, maybe even fans of your show going in the door, are going to encounter this, because you're going to give a recommendation, and then along with it, they're going to go into a store and say, "I want to buy X, Y, and Z with these features," and the salesman doesn't understand the context of the question, and that scared me. Then the guy was trying to sell me on a lane keeping assistance. I'm like, bro, come on. Like, really? Like, come on. So, I feel.
You see that thing we drove up in?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought LKA was like a lot.
Yeah, here, let me ask you, three of you a question, because you're very knowledgeable people, and I could not get an answer from Subaru on this, or anyone else, and I think I'm pretty knowledgeable. If you go to a Subaru dealership and you're shopping for an Outback or any of like the wagon crossover models, and you look at the options chart, they have a comprehensive standard package of driver assistance features, including radar cruise and lane keeping. But if you go up the chain to sport and premium models, then they have a thing called eyesight. Mm-hmm. It's some kind of driver monitoring. And I thought I was an expert.
Actually, Subaru doesn't use radar for cruise control. Their eyesight is a stereo camera system. So it's two cameras set on either side of the mirror.
Okay, so I'm wrong, actually. So eyesight is standard. It's the thing that they have is driver focus tech is like on the upper models. Can anyone tell me what driver focus is? None of the dealer could.
I don't know exactly how Subaru implements it, but for a while, like I would say at least the last 7 years, some cars, when I drive them in a certain manner, will light up a little coffee cup icon and tell me that it's time to take a break. Usually it's because I've made some strange inputs that they've noticed either through their steering angle sensor and just the stability control has noticed that I'm either doing donuts or something. Right. So I think you could do it that way, where you just look at the inputs without a camera on the driver, which I know a lot of the newer systems are doing now, where they've added actual like driver camera monitors to make
driver focus in a Subaru is not a camera-based system.
No.
Yeah. So I think it
doesn't look like it.
It's looking at the inputs and comparing them between what would be expected and if you're making lots of sharp erratic inputs like you would if you're kind of trying to drive.
Okay, I get
a little
that.
Aggressively.
So going back for a second to what Sam said, because this is why I love this show, because I'm actually learning something. Sam, so what I'm understanding here about the Subaru dealership is that their adaptive cruise is not radar-based, so I thought it was, and it's camera-based. And when I asked that question, the guy's response was, well, it's adaptive. He didn't give me the second piece of information, which is it is adaptive and yet doesn't require radar, which would have put that in. So I thought he was an idiot and he didn't understand where I was coming from. Thank you for teaching me something.
He may not have known. I know that
more than likely he didn't know.
Well,
brand training is really important, though. So like that's
fascinating.
That's something you should talk to the zone rep about. Or maybe
Thank you. Okay, I'm done talking. Tell me about your cars.
Well, no, but what's interesting is I went on the Subaru Crosstrek launch, and I don't think they talked about it at all. I don't know if it's in the Crosstrek though.
I cite it standard.
It is, so maybe I wasn't paying attention. I don't know. There might have been a puppy involved.
Let me ask you a question, Rebecca. Do you like the Crosstrek?
You know what? And actually, I just had one a couple weeks ago. I think it's a fun car. I think it's a great run. I think I called it like a little suburban runabout. So, I like the fact that it's all-wheel drive. I like the ride height of it. It's got really good ground clearance. I remember actually writing something for Forbes right after Hurricane Sandy, and the Crosstrek had one of the highest ground clearances. And so I was out of town for Hurricane Sandy at a Ford event, actually. And when I got back, I was trying to drive home in my Fiat 500. And let me tell you, there were branches down that were bigger than that car, right? And so I looked at like all the different cars that had a decent amount of ground clearance for things like that, or like the snowstorm that we're supposed to get, in the next day or two with the 8 to 12 inches of snow. So I think I like the fact that it's a smaller vehicle with really good ground clearance, especially for the size.
Okay,
so I liked it. And
my daughter may end up in one. So
yeah. So my nephew Jake, his mom had leased one, and then she didn't need her lease anymore, so he took it over. And he's 26 now and driving all over the place. And his girlfriend lives someplace else, and the whole thing. And he loves it, and he's really been happy with it. And I really liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. I think I talked about it on the show a couple episodes ago.
Yeah.
So to get back to the driver focus for a moment, while you guys were talking, I was looking it up. In fact, Subaru does have a camera that's looking at the driver. And as Dan said, most of the earlier systems were just using the steering input information, basically the same way that Tesla tries to detect if the driver's hands are on the wheel, looking for those,
stick some oranges in there and
those little steering wheel motions, and it tries to detect your normal pattern. When there's a deviation from that, then it says, "Hey, maybe you might be tired." And then newer systems use the forward-looking camera for the lane keeping assist. And if you're bouncing off the lanes too frequently, then it again thinks, okay, maybe you're tired or otherwise incapacitated.
Imagine if you put the Subaru driver focus system on a Tesla so it could analyze what the Tesla is doing.
Yeah. And then Subaru actually has a camera that's doing, looking for your eye gaze and your head position to detect if you're getting tired. So,
there's
or
actually,
if you're looking at your phone.
There's a company nearby here, or in Connecticut, called Drive, DREYEV, and I've met with them a couple of times just because we're both in the industry and there's not that many people around here. And they offer a driver-facing camera, a forward-facing camera, a fleet dashboard, and it's basically they would like it to be part of the vehicle build, but right now it's aftermarket, but they're using it a lot in commercial applications. And so it's very much, following the eye position, eyelid closing patterns to detect drowsiness and things like that. So it's I think it basically focuses very much on the driver's head. And, like Alex, like you were talking about where you're, distracted by your phone and, the temptation to look over. And so the Drive system is very much a tentative just to the driver.
What I'd like to see, and I imagine the three of you are all over this at some point in the future, Euro NCAP safety standards are going to require some type of driver monitoring system in the future. And I'm not aware that they've defined how it's designed or even necessarily exactly how it's going to work. But I'd love to see in the future a comparison of the different driver monitoring systems. Driver focus, the old coffee cup systems, Seeing Machines as the system in Cadillac and the BMW and the new Ford F-150. And then there's Eyesight, which is out of Sweden, right?
Eyesight is the brand for Subaru's Linky, their ADAS. There's a bunch of different ones.
Anyway, I'd like to see them compared on a track with someone being distracted and how the alerts work. And the alerts is one half. Then I'd like to know how the OEMs use those alerts to trigger or not trigger systems to mitigate or compensate. And I think that's the future of automotive journalism. And hopefully, if anyone's going to do it, it'll be you, since the state of automotive journalism technically is, those things aren't always connected.
I will say that the Cadillac system is very, I have an Escalade this week. So the Cadillac system has already given me the attention warning. I was trying to do something with their infotainment and it got to the point where I picked up my phone and was making the call, and it was like, "Hey, knock it off." So it's not shy, which I think is good, and I think that's one of the things that automotive journalists need to recognize is the safety systems that we've for decades called like nannies. If you're driving in a particular way, if you're driving like an enthusiast, they're going to intervene. But for the people who aren't trying to trigger a slide, they're better. they're worth having. And those warnings, it's like when your bank shuts down your credit card because it notices weird transactions. Even if it was you, you're happy that they did it because it could not have been you at some point. So it's that same kind of thing. They're protective for most people who shouldn't be driving like we drive.
Yeah,
we shouldn't be driving like we drive sometimes.
So
speak for yourself.
So what are you all driving? Wasn't that what the segment's about?
Okay. I just teased the Escalade. So I've got an Escalade, which is $109,000 and it's just super lovely and I adore it and I don't want to give it back. It's a typical press fleet Cadillac. So it's not. I was going to say it's what you imagine a Cadillac to be, like white leather interior, which is like that's a classic Cadillac thing. I don't necessarily want to own that, but it's lovely. It
just ban really nice. All ballpoint pens and you'll be fine.
It's also perfect for taking your Labradoodle to the groomer.
that's exactly
for visiting Alex in Miami.
Right. I put a towel down on the seat, but it has the screens in the back, and so it's loaded up with tech. It's all the materials are really nice, and that's what really stands out. It's the outside is fine. It looks like Cadillac Escalade. They've done a really nice job evolving the style, but inside is really where it impresses. You know, it's got a big sweep of screens, and the screens they're really high quality screens. That's one thing I was noticing is they must be OLED or
They are.
something.
They are OLED.
But man, do they look good? And I don't really like screens in cars, but and it sweeps all the way from the very left side of the instrument panel all the way over to the center stack. So there's a lot of screen in it, and it's well done. Some of the interface, the touchscreen part of it, isn't great. Some of the stuff is hard to find, and the targets are a little small. We constantly say that. I think as I've spent a few days with it, it's gotten better. But the overall driving experience is fantastic. It feels light on its feet. It's got the 6.2 liter V8, which I don't want to talk about the fuel economy I'm getting.
It's using fuel. Let's leave it at that.
Yes, it's using fuel. So thank you everybody with the efficient cars for leaving some for me. It's such a big thing, and that's why I was noticing that it really handles and rides quite well. So the new independent rear suspension makes a big difference. It doesn't feel as heavy as it is, and it's not that it feels small. You know, some cars they just sort of shrink around you when you drive them. It still feels big, but it feels maneuverable and just sort of well controlled. And it's the newest one in its class. So I'm hopeful that it pulls everybody else along. I was commenting to my wife, it's like, you know, the Navigator, which we also like quite a bit because, I mean, we like to be coddled New Englanders. That one feels a little bit heavier, a little less light on its feet, a little more clumsy almost. But neither of them are real clumsy. These are amazingly nimble vehicles for what they do, and I love the size. I really like the new features. The tech in the Cadillac has come a long way. This is a real step up for Q, if they're still calling it Q. And the materials, I geeked out over how it's decorated in there. You know, there's wood and leather and cloth, and it's beautiful. So whoever designed that interior did the best job. I love it in there. I just
one question,
live in it.
My big beef with so many cars is that everything you say is true until you use the backup camera, and then suddenly that screen resolution displays this low-res trash.
No, honestly,
yeah, for sure.
It took me 15 minutes to figure out when it first came. So it's got forward-looking cameras as well, and so you can put in the instrument panel behind the speed display, you can put the augmented reality camera, so it's showing you a wider angle view of what's in front of the car as you drive. And I was like, I got to shut that off because I could see it in my periphery. I could see all the houses and stuff I'm going by. So it was distracting to me. But in like a parking lot or something like that, where you've got to maneuver tightly, it'll show you what's in front of the car in a really wide angle view that's nice. And it has night vision as well, which you can pop right behind there. So in that sense, if you can train yourself to not stare at the screen and look out the windshield, it has a lot of options to make it easier to maneuver such a large, tall vehicle, which that is one of the problems is trucks are getting so high that, you know, it's going to take you 50 feet before you realize you mowed over somebody's pet. So, the screens are good. I was impressed with the screens, and I wanted to note that specifically because I normally hate screens.
Two questions. Did the Escalade, does the Escalade you're driving have Super Cruise on it? And does it have the camera mirror system in it?
I don't believe it has Super Cruise. I'll have to check on the camera mirror.
Okay.
That's what you just flick it, right?
Just flip camera. It. You know, the way you used to flip it, to go for, when there's somebody driving with their headlights on behind you at night.
Right.
When you flip it now, it switches over to the camera view. So you have an unobstructed view, no pillars and headrests and all the other nonsense. So you can actually see what's behind you.
Yeah. I am pretty sure it does not have Super Cruise. That's probably an option to make it like $115,000. And the other car I had real briefly was the Genesis GV80, which, again, talking about screens, that has a nice instrument panel that is all screen, but it's like a 3D effect with it. I'm not quite sure what they've done with the screens, if they've got different actual planes in there that they for the display or something. But I was looking at that. That's a really interesting way to execute the instrument panel, and I love the details in the GV80. Everywhere you look, it's just been fussed over, to the little things that just make you smile. It's got a backwards winding tachometer, which I chuckled about. It's such a little geeky thing, but I loved it. The outside design, it's beautiful. It definitely looks expensive. It doesn't really matter what it costs. It just looks like it costs a lot.
The interior look, I mean, based on these pictures, like if I saw it, I'd be like, oh, it's a new Bentley.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right?
And the interior
is really
what it feels
gorgeous.
like.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
I love the interior. It's really opulent inside. And Diamond Stitch says money. And it's got plenty of Diamond Stitch. And that's... So, again, Genesis is just... They're doing a really good job finding that balance of design and value and premium feel and look, regardless of price. Because it was $72,000, which, again, that's premium car money, but it starts at $48,000, which that's attainable. That's not that far up. The controls that you've Rebecca and Sam that you've talked about, the little rotary controller, I did experience a little bit of that where the rotary controller it was too slippery. Like I couldn't get enough purchase on it. I
mean, the biggest challenge that Genesis has, I think, as we've talked about a lot, is just the brand image and recognition. And, because when I haven't had the GV80
awareness that it exists.
Awareness, all those things. But when I went on the GV80 launch, but I haven't had one for the week here. But when, when we're talking to people about it, and certainly when I've had any of their sedans, and I say, this car is so good. They're so beautiful. And people are like, really? A Hyundai, a Genesis, and it's just, I don't know what they need to do. They've got to put some money behind marketing and awareness beyond just golf tournaments.
I know.
And, and really dig in and get some grassroots going because the cars are so good. Yeah. It would just be a shame for it not to be a successful brand.
Yeah,
there's opportunity.
Really and it's not just they're well designed and they're comfortable and luxurious. They drive really well, which
absolutely
is so it's the whole package, which this is what they should have launched Genesis with. I'm a little, from the sidelines, I'm a little annoyed that it's taken them this long to get it to market, but it's also, they had to get their act together with it. So now that they've got it, they should very aggressively tell everybody that they have it, because it's really, really competitive and really good. So I'll stop talking now and move on. Rebecca, why don't you tell us what you're driving?
So I had I had two cars, but I'll focus on one for time. I had the 2021 Audi A6 AllRoad in the Prestige, which is top of the line. And
I see Alex smiling.
Most people know that Rebecca drives. I write car reviews in 200 words or less, and this is going to be less, because the review is butter. That's it. That's the whole review. Just butter.
Not no parquet, no margin.
It really is. It's delicious. So just a little quick background. My neighbor raises golden retrievers, which I did not know when I bought my house, but believe me, it's a lot of happiness over there. And so when I first moved in, I spent a lot of time outside because the grounds needed a lot of work. And one of my first days, these two gorgeous 8-month-old golden retriever puppies come over, unleashed, uncollared. I didn't know where they came from.
Did you steal them?
I'm sorry?
Did you steal them?
So the little girl, her brother would go and get all muddy and stuff, and then he'd run home. And which then I figured out was a couple of fields, because I live in the country. So they live a field over. So then the little girl, she would actually want to come in the house. So I would let her in, but I needed to name her because I didn't know her name and I didn't know the neighbors. And so I called her Butter because she was golden and delicious. And so now Butter's 8 years old, and I keep asking the owner if I can please have her whenever. So this car, it's Teutonic butter. That's what I wrote in my review.
Teutonic butter.
So it's just so smooth. This has the 3.0 liter 6-cylinder engine. It's got 335 horsepower, which is so happy. I did triple digits without meaning to on a regular basis, and that's sub up.
Without meaning to. That's all.
Without meaning to.
I know I'm going to do 110 here, but.
Well, so I had a perfect excuse. I had to deliver. I sold this great big giant 7-foot artificial tree. That's actually a really beautiful tree that I had gotten at a flea market or a estate sale here. I can't use it. I've got to sell it. So I had the perfect excuse to drive up probably about 35, 40 miles, all on the Merritt Parkway, which is a really windy, lovely road. And so I drove it up there. Two things: the tree fit perfectly into the car, which is impressive with the second row backseat down. And then that car was just so happy to be on the highway, to be in that kind of environment. But it was great around town also, because I love that wagon. It's low, this low center of gravity. You can dive into curves. It's just, it's great. People can get in and out of it really easily. You can get stuff in and out of it really easily. And it's not a minivan, but it still is a family hauler. And so go Audi. I loved it. The interior too. Dan, when you're talking about the Cadillac, every piece of this interior was beautiful. And I mean, people know, well, I can break any infotainment system that you give me. And this thing actually worked really, really well. I love the haptic feedback because then I know it's taken, then I know it's listening to me.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And so that worked really well for me. And it was just a joy. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. So 71.4 was the one that actually mine was about 75. It starts at 65.9 for the Premium Plus. And as I mentioned, I had the Prestige. So 2021 Audi A6.
Remind the listeners
AllRoad.
What car that was.
I was just doing that. You were listening. 2021 Audi A6 AllRoad. I had the Prestige line. Absolutely delicious.
Excellent. And I had the 2021 Infiniti QX50 Autograph all-wheel drive, and so the QX50 is Infiniti's it's a mid-size crossover.
Isn't that sad that we have to explain that?
I was just going to say that. I find it amusing that we have to explain what the QX50 is. This vehicle will later this year also spawn the QX55, which, Infiniti, when they announced it a couple of months ago, called it the inspired by the old FX, the Infiniti FX, because all the QX55 is a QX50 with, a little bit less of the roof, it's kind of, so they charge you more and they give you less. You get less rear headroom.
You get less rear headroom, less roof, less cargo space.
You get more style.
But you get a little more style.
I will pay for style.
That's
every
not what
time.
this is. This is the
It's
QX50
like the X5 versus X6, right?
Where I think with the 50, you still get plenty of style. I think I like Infiniti's design language. I think this is a really good looking vehicle. The only engine that's available in the QX50 is the 2-liter VCT, the variable compression turbo engine, which we've talked about before. It's a really nice engine. It's a surprisingly good engine. When I first heard about this, this concept of this variable compression engine, and I looked at the diagrams of this thing, why the hell are they doing this? This makes no sense.
It's quite a contraption, fellas.
Yeah, there's a lot of hardware down in the bottom end of that engine. Yeah. To change the compression ratio. But it's actually, when you look at it in more detail, it's not as complex as it seems. And it actually works really well. And I remember when they first announced it, talking to the chief engineer on the engine at the LA Auto Show, and he explained that one of the advantages of this engine, because of the way this system works for varying the compression ratio. Essentially, what it does is it twists the crankshaft a little bit, and the crankshaft is actually offset a little bit from the center line of the cylinders. So what ends up happening is you actually have reduced side loads on the pistons as they're going up and down. And so the engine is actually better balanced than it would be normally. And it's, even without balance shafts on it, it's actually smoother. So it's actually a really nice engine to drive. It's 268 horsepower, and 280 foot-pounds of torque, and good torque all the way through. You can actually pull up on the instrument cluster. One of the bits of data that you can show is the compression ratio in real time, which
really,
yeah, I mean, it's kind of pointless, but
so geeky.
I mean, for an engine geek like me, it's kind of interesting. But the reality is you can just drive this thing and it just drives really nice. The Autograph is the top end trim level. I think there's about 5 different trim levels available on the QX50. It ranges from I
gotta add, wait, this is a $60,000 car, isn't it?
Yeah, the one I drove was including the delivery charges, $61,765. But
call me primitive and ignorant, but I feel a little funny. Like 2 liters, I don't care how it's designed for $60,000. I'm like, yeah.
Well, I mean, go look at modern BMWs and Mercedes. You're getting 2-liter 4-cylinders, and most of those in that same price range as well.
I feel like they're ripping me off. I don't know.
Jaguar.
I don't know. It's like,
or Volvo for that matter.
Yeah, but Volvo, I don't expect a big engine. It's a difference. Like,
okay.
Is this not as performance oriented, or why?
It's just like in my mind, maybe me. I'm suffering from Mesozoic era thinking, and also I haven't really owned a car with a small modern car with an internal combustion engine. So, like in my mind, I feel like I've not yet been convinced. Am I just wrong?
I was skeptical when these turbocharged direct injected engines first started coming out, really back, I guess maybe almost 15 years ago now. Some of the first ones like from Volkswagen and Audi, and they're pretty commonplace now. And, these modern engines actually feel a lot stronger than you would think. Yeah, I agree. Growing up, a 2-liter engine was, that's nothing. I mean, I've had 2-liter engines, that produced under 100 horsepower, and this feels like a much larger engine. The reality is most people never look under the hood of their car anyway, and they don't care what's there. They drive it, and if the driving experience is good, then it won't matter how big the engine is.
But to Alex's point, do you think that's true of the Infiniti buyer?
Yeah, I think most Infiniti buyers probably don't really care.
As long as it performs, they don't care about the specs.
As long as it performs, yeah.
No one's buying a QX50 for the performance, but it does say 50 on it. And I just can't disconnect. There's nothing 50 about this car,
right? I mean,
except the price, which is 60 for the top.
I feel like a lot of Infiniti.
It started at 38,000, so
that is value to me.
But I feel like Infiniti buyers are a little bit more premium, a little more performance oriented than say a Lexus buyer.
Yes,
a Lexus RX buyer.
In general, I would say that's definitely true, and this. Overall has a sportier feel than an RX does. Yeah. And there's no question about that.
That's not hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think this vehicle's stance, the way it moves down the road, its body control, everything about it has a more athletic feel to it. It's, I think it's well executed. Would I pay $60,000 for it? No, probably not. But in the mid 40s, for like the QX50 Lux all-wheel drive, 43.5 for that one.
So that's not bad. This is the thing that I struggle with sometimes with media cars, and I don't want to belabor the point, but the interior in the trim that you've got, beautiful. I love Infiniti interiors when we get them as media cars because they're usually really nicely executed. But when you start to look at the lower trims, they're not necessarily outfitted the same, and that's where they feel like less of a value, because for the money, for 45, you're getting something that's not necessarily going to have the quilted leather with the contrasting stitching and the accent stuff. So you got to sort of carefully look at what you're getting for that price, and that's and it's not just Infiniti. But
my other car that I didn't talk about that was the Sentra, the Nissan Sentra, and that thing had a beautiful interior. I mean, it was really, really nicely done.
Yeah, for like
it had a really nice feel to it. And, it's so, and yes, it's all tricked out, but it's still, was pretty inexpensive.
Even
and
loaded, Sentra's, what, $26,000?
Yeah. I mean, that had a really, really nice feel. It didn't have Android Auto, as does Infiniti doesn't either.
Yes, it did.
Well, that's what I thought. But when I was looking online, it doesn't show it. On Infinity's, it only talks about Apple CarPlay.
No, it's got Android Auto. I mean, I'm looking at the site right now, even on the base pure model, CarPlay and Android Auto, and I use it.
So I'm on the QX50. Is that what you're on?
Yeah.
This is only highlighting Apple CarPlay, because then I looked back and I was like,
they may only be highlighting that, but it's got Android Auto.
Well, Apple CarPlay, like, you want to make sure that you attract those Apple customers.
I mean,
they are
because I was thinking, I thought, how did I not notice this in the Sentra? And the same thing on the Sentra website.
Yeah, all Nissans have both.
That's what I thought. But why would they only? Yeah. That's half the global population has an Android Auto, has an Android phone.
I think actually probably more.
Get your head out of America, people. Drives me crazy.
Is it actually you actually probably know, but it's probably more than half that has Android.
The US is the one exception where like 55% is iPhone and the rest is Android. And globally, it's like 83% Android. And then the rest
I had the same
iPhone.
Conversation with Porsche and I lost.
Yeah, but at any rate, Infiniti does support both.
Okay.
But their infotainment system is a little odd because it's got that split 2-screen layout.
Yeah.
So you have the upper two separate touch screens. The one above is for the media stuff, and then down below is for climate controls and other control, settings and things like that. And it looks a little confused and not particularly well thought out. I mean, it works okay. But it's, it does look a little peculiar, and especially now in an era where we're starting to see these big, massive, single screen layouts. I think that I'm guessing that the next generation of Infinitis hopefully won't follow this path. But, I think, the QX50 is a really nice midsize crossover. Especially I think, in the middle trim levels, where you're still going to get a decent combination of equipment at a much more reasonable price point. I think 60 is probably on a little high for what you're getting with this one. But even, in the Lux trim level, you're still getting their Pro Pilot Assist, which, while certainly not as capable as many others, it does a decent job of helping keep you centered in the lane. And the adaptive cruise.
But does it?
It's a little aggressive.
On the highway, it does, yeah.
Alex, I feel like you have feelings about this.
It's not, it's a hands-on system. So, it really is just assisting you. This is one of the things that's annoyed me about Nissan that I've complained about in the past, especially outside of the US. They refer to it as more of an autonomous system, which it absolutely most certainly is not. I remember a few years ago, Carlos Ghosn speaking at CES, and then a couple days later at the Detroit Auto Show, referring to ProPilot when they were first launching it as their first autonomous system. And I went to Brian Brockman, who's now head of comms for Nissan North America, and tell him, hey, Brian, you got to get him to stop with this autonomous stuff. This is not at all autonomous. And by the time they actually launched the system here in the U.S., they rebadged it. Overseas, it is just called ProPilot. Here, it's ProPilot Assist, and they make it very clear that this is a driver assist system. But the adaptive cruise works fine on there. So that's the QX50 Infiniti.
My beef with almost all these systems except like Cadillac and upcoming super F-150 C machines enabled assistance system is that no matter what these systems do, the interface with the driver is like a multi-stage button engagement system with a very small little light up icons in the dash. So to engage them is difficult. The driver's awareness of the system's state is very poor. Yes. And this is true of pretty much everybody except Cadillac with that beautiful steering wheel with the light up bar on the top.
Well, that's beautiful. I will give Nissan and Infiniti some credit there. There is the blue button on the on the steering wheel. And it's pretty distinct from everything else on the steering wheel. So you've got blue. It's got like an overhead view icon of a car surrounded by some blue circles, and it's pretty clear that this is something different. You hit that, and then on the cluster, it shows you when that's engaged. So yes, it's certainly not as good as what Super Cruise does, but I think it's better than most.
That's a really good point, though, Alex, is because I find myself doing this. I'm just thinking about when I get in media cars, sometimes they have the lane keeping on, and that's really aggressive, and I want to try it without it. And there's like 4 buttons sometimes for each different feature, and they're not in the same place. And it's hard to figure out, like, how do I turn that thing off or on? Either way.
It's bad user experience design.
I think it's GM that has like a 2-stage process to activate adaptive cruise control. Like it's like, and I remember it was very confusing because it was like, I just want it activated. And if I don't want it, then that should be the effort, not like
you get regular cruise first and then adaptive or something like that. Yeah.
Right. Which I thought, I didn't, because then of course I'm thinking that it's adaptive, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm on that guy's tail.
Oh, I heard some from a fellow auto writer. I heard some stories about using dynamic cruise in the wrong place at the wrong time and doing exactly that, running a brand new car into the back of the tractor trailer.
Well, and Lucy has a lot to say about that too.
Smartphones have gotten way more expensive over the past decade, and all it takes is one impact on a hard floor to make you wish you had spent a few bucks to put a case on it. Going online without ExpressVPN is like not having a case for your phone, and it only costs a few dollars a month. Nicole, Robbie, and I travel a lot for our work, and we spend a lot of time in hotels, coffee shops, airplanes, and of course the Delta Sky Club. Connecting to the Wi-Fi in any public places with shared Wi-Fi puts your data at risk because bad actors could be intercepting what you send and using it to steal from you. It only takes some cheap hardware to intercept Wi-Fi data, and even a smart preteen can do it. Hackers can make up to $1,000 per victim selling personal information on the dark web. ExpressVPN stops the bad guys by creating a secure, encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet. ExpressVPN uses state-of-the-art encryption that would take a supercomputer up to 1 billion years to crack. I have ExpressVPN on all my devices, including a MacBook Pro, Windows laptops and desktops, and Android and iOS phones and laptops, or tablets. When I want to be secure, I just launch the app, click once to connect, and my data is secure. As I said, I travel a lot for my work, and I have to connect to countless public Wi-Fi networks in many countries. I have ExpressVPN on all my connected devices so that whoever else is on the same network can't see any of my data. That's important because I often have to check banks, credit card accounts, and transmit client data that might be sensitive, as well as filing articles on news that might be under embargo. ExpressVPN protects all of it, and I've been paying for my own account for years. Secure your online data today by visiting expressvpn.com/wheelbearings. That's expressvpn.com/wheelbearings, and you can get an extra 4 months for free. expressvpn.com/wheelbearings. Well, while we're on the topic of user interface design into vehicles, earlier this week Tesla had their Q4 earnings call, and they announced a refresh of the Model S and the Model X. As a Tesla driver, Alex, tell us, what did you think of this new steering mechanism that they have in there?
You're referring to the aircraft style yoke, like the Boeing style aviation yoke.
Yes, I believe in their
yes, we are
calling it a butterfly steering wheel.
So obviously the most famous example of this is the Knight Rider steering wheel, which was also like that. There's a fun article in Road and Track where they embed a video of Mr. Regular from Regular Car Reviews, who goes and drives one of these Knight Rider replicas. The problem with that car, with the Knight Rider car, twofold. The yoke is so wide that when you turn it, it gets into your legs. and it's very difficult to take turns because the steering ratio is unchanged on the Knight Rider vehicles. So you have to turn this thing around multiple times, and it's really bad. It's tough. So if it seems to me, and we don't yet know, that if Tesla has increased the steering ratio such that you don't need to turn the wheel more than, say, 80 degrees, right? Maybe, and also the steering wheel does not appear that wide. So from that standpoint, I think that problem is they've solved the Knight Rider problem. I don't know if that's the case, and it might take some getting used to. But back in 71, when or late 60s, and Citroën introduced a system called the Diravi system, which I owned, which was installed on my Citroën SM, which was a 73. And that system had the lowest, well, it had a variable steering ratio. At different speeds, the ratio changed, and it was hydropneumatic system. So at high speeds, it required greater force to turn the wheel, and it was very difficult to turn the car. At low speeds, you could take one finger and rotate the wheel like 3x. As a result, I crashed the car in a garage in like the third day I owned the car, and that was very expensive. And the manual for that car stated that the Diravi system is the most advanced and safest such system, and it should require no less than 50 hours of driving time to familiarize the user with the system. So I imagine for this thing to work,
what could go wrong in 50 hours?
Yeah, a lot. I crashed the car 2 times.
Right, 3 days. It doesn't strike me as 50 hours.
So the Tesla steering wheel. So I imagine. Tesla's interesting because what they do is they introduce some functionality which seems wildly different and crazy, and then they have a setting to turn it on or off. So the regenerative braking in the car, the default setting is high regen. One pedal throttle, and then I almost never use the brake pedal in that car. But you can set it to low regen, and it feels more like an internal combustion car without a regen system. I imagine that for this to work at all, the default setting is going to have to be since it's drive-by-wire, a setting that allows you to do all your steering with no more than, say, 70 degrees of input. And the Tesla fan base is going to claim to love it, whether they do or they don't. They're going to claim to love it, and they're just going to get used to it. And then new buyers will just get used to it, or they could turn it off, but they're going to want to leave it on. It's a very Muskian thing to do, and I can't lie. I think it might work because I know that in my driving in the Tesla, I have my seat position settings, and I always hold the wheel 3 and 9, and I hook my hands in like this. I do most of my driving without moving my arms more than a little bit, most of it. The only exception is parallel parking, which brings us to the second phase of the nonsense of this design, which might actually be stupid, is that Musk says they're not going to have turning stocks, or turn signal, or a gear selector. This is stupid, and it can't possibly work because there are too many cases where you need to signal something, but you're not making a lane change or a turn. It happens.
Mm-hmm. I think, though, is that like just him speaking nonsense off the cuff where you're like, oh, come on.
What he's doing.
The images they released, there's no stocks.
Here's what he's doing. The logic of what he's saying is predicated on convincing people that full self-driving, level 4 or 5, is imminent. And it's going to coincide within a few months or a year of the arrival of this new UI. And that's nonsense. That's absolutely nonsense. The majority, even if full self-driving worked anywhere, and if they can't make it work at Tesla supercharger parking lots, it doesn't work. Okay. The majority of buyers of this car who may be foolish enough to spend $10,000 on the functionality are not going to live places where full self-driving works or allows you to be truly driverless. So you're going to need stocks, you're going to need a gear selector. And the notion that the system, which cannot drive itself, currently will know whether or not to signal or change gears is also absurd.
Well, and especially, Alex, I mean, we're almost an hour into recording, and just remind our listeners what you do as your day job again.
Well, I work for an autonomous vehicle developer, Argo AI, and Argo feels, Brian Selesky, my friend, who co-hosts the No Parking podcast with me, that clarity of language and honesty is important. So
he's right.
That's
So you're a Tesla owner.
I'm a Tesla owner. I love the car,
but you're much more qualified than the average person to speak about where we are when it comes to autonomous driving and looking at that kind of development. And so I love getting your perspective on this because you have an inside track on really what we're looking at.
Well, let me say that probably the most important conversation to have around all of autonomous vehicles is around clarity of language and what things really mean. I'm working on a column now that's going to run on Ground Truth about how everything we own, doesn't matter what it is, has a geofence. Your shoes have a geofence. They do. Everything in the world's ever been invented to serve a purpose has a fence. A pen's fence is when it touches paper. Your sneakers function running. They don't work on the beach. Snowshoes don't work for swimming. Flippers, fences in the water. Everything's a fence. The purpose of the fence is for people to know when and where things are supposed to work by design. And inside a fence, you can have a smaller area in which things work perfectly, and then there are things where things work suboptimally. So the notion that why do we want autonomous vehicles at all? What we really want is we just don't want to. If you don't want to drive, you don't want to be then being in the driver's seat defeats the purpose. It doesn't make any sense. So we're playing games of language here, which make no sense. So if a vehicle is capable of driving itself anywhere you might likely go, you can take out the stalks and turn signal indicators and what's it called? The gear selector, because you can just tell it. You just tell it what to do. You can sit in the back. But
we started this conversation with talking about magic carpet rides, right?
Yeah.
And so apparently we've migrated to mind reading now.
Yeah. It's what so something that's just, it's fun to talk about. It's a fun joke to make. And if one said that vehicles, the full self-driving geofence was parking lots where superchargers exist and they only function there, then you don't need stalks or anything. You just don't. This is all pointless. It's pointless to just to talk about it because it makes no sense. You need stalks and you need a gear shift selector.
I think actually, you federally mandated to have them right now.
I don't know if you do.
Well, that's still kind of an open question.
Oh, really?
Certainly for the shift selector, that it doesn't have to be a stock on the steering column. Obviously, there has to be some. Right now, there has to be some kind of physical control for it. We have a lot of vehicles now that have push buttons or rotary controllers or all kinds of different interfaces for that. The turn signal stock, again, it's not entirely clear that it necessarily has to be a stock. It's a stock by convention. We've since the 1940s, we've basically settled on a basic layout of controls. Of the accelerator pedals on the right, brake pedals next to it, to the left of it, clutch on the far left if you have one. Turn signal stock, on the steering column on the left hand side, and maybe a transmission on the right or somewhere else. Because it works. That's a convention, but it's not actually mandated anywhere.
Yeah, but see, the problem.
I have to interrupt for a second, if I may. The biggest reason you want to have at least one stock on a Tesla is because today, set aside autopilots, which is a driver assistance system, set aside some issues that it has. In terms of engagement of the system, it is the best on the market, because if you want to engage adaptive cruise on a Tesla, okay, you tap the stalk down once. It's the simplest system on the market for engagement of the system. And if you want to engage adaptive cruise plus lane keeping, which is what autopilot is, you down twice. And no other manufacturer has simplified it to this level. And it is why the system enjoys such great loyalty and popularity among Tesla fans, even though the system has some flaws. And
like running into the back of stationary fire trucks.
Well, that's a separate issue. That is not a UI issue. That has to do with
the functionality.
The functionality of the system. But in terms of actual interface, it is the best interface there is for engagement and disengagement. Now, if you remove that stock, I'm not sure like what better method there is of engaging that system. Maybe I've missed something here.
Well, that's what I was going to get to is, they actually do have controls for the turn signals and autopilot. There's capacitive touch surfaces on the yoke, the spokes of the yoke.
Yeah. Does it work with gloves?
There's capacitive touch on
the left-hand side, on the left-hand spoke, there's a couple of buttons for the turn signal. So there's a capacitive touch surface there. And then I think autopilot's on the right-hand stock.
Let me tell you a story about capacitive touch.
There's a capacitive way. Clarify for me here. I was under the impression there's no capacitive touch on the Tesla wheel.
On the new one, on this yoke, there is.
Oh well, I stand totally corrected for a second time.
Yeah. So it's so there is a control there. It's designed to activate automatically to guess what you want to do, but there is a control there, and there's also manual control for the transmission select, but it's in the center touchscreen.
I hate that.
Which is stupid.
Okay. So again, let me tell you a story about capacitive touch. Our dishwasher has capacitive touch for controls all across the top. And you brush it with your ankle when you're unloading it, and you just like select all kinds of stuff. So when you close it, it just starts running, and you have to remember to cancel it all. That's what's going to happen if you have capacitive touch on the spokes of that yoke. Dude, like people are just going to hit stuff by mistake now, like without intent. We can go down an entire UI rabbit hole.
I'm not arguing that this is a good idea. I think it's a ridiculous idea.
It sounds to me like I came to this episode with the wrong attitude completely, and I think that they're full on going to get rid of those stocks.
I don't know that it's Alex. I don't think it's necessarily
I'm totally wrong
attitude. I think that what I want to see. I don't mind if they get rid of the stocks. I do like that we've got a convention that's 60, 70 years old now that everybody expects. I think there's a safety aspect to that is important. But if you're going to break the convention and make a change, I feel like it needs to be an improvement, and I don't know that we're there yet. So if you want to get rid of the stocks, come up with a way other than saying the car is going to guess what you want. Because it'll do okay, like maybe 70% of the time, and then that other 30% is where bad things are going to happen. So if you're going to innovate. Don't just change for the sake of change. Although it's been a masterful way of controlling the sort of the hype cycle. So I guess when your job is to attract investment and continue to deliver shareholder value, I can't fault that. But
sounds to me like you. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So I think of the Mercedes gear shifter stock, which I find very hard to get used to every single time that I try, and because it's on the right side and it's where like the blinkers are, and it's where, or the windshield wipers or something. And so there have been changes made to that setup. The idea of having the blinkers on the yoke, the indicators. First of all, I just want to make sure that I can control it, because I do not expect a car to guess what I'm thinking, or what my next move is going to be, especially in more rural areas where in Boston, you're driving on paved horse paths. You're not driving on a nice grid.
Well, try circling the Arc of Triumph. Like you're not
right.
You need a manual.
Forget that, right? So, I think. But to Dan's point, I appreciate that. Yes, you have to innovate, and it needs to be in some kind of benefit, whether it's more convenient, easier to use, safer, all those things. What throws me off, it probably more or equally, is the idea that, so many people still don't put their hands on the right place on a steering wheel at that 3 and 9. And you're right. Like, you're right, Alex. Like you can, I try and drive my entire drive. I had to go out to Long Island, probably about a 70-mile drive. And it dawned on me, I thought, for the most part, I didn't move my hands the whole time. It was really, really comfortable. And But most people, are still gripping 10 and 2 like it's their life depends upon it. So it'll be interesting to see how people adapt. If anybody's going to adapt, though, it is the early adopter innovators that tend to buy Teslas. So we'll see what happens.
Sam, next time you come into an episode, if you got critical information, please share it up front.
Welcome to our world.
Where did you see the capacitive touch news about that wheel? I mean, I read a bunch of articles. I didn't see that.
There's, I think, Roadshow had it. There was a bunch of articles that had it. I'll find something and send it.
Was
to
that
you.
an official Tesla news? The capacitive touch component?
I think it was. I think it might have been in that report or somewhere. I'll find it for you. But and I think the question was asked as well during the conference call, during the earnings call. When after Elon announced this and revealed this, I think somebody might have asked about that. But so the capacitive surfaces are there. I agree. I think it should be physical controls, and I think a stock works really well. I think part of the reason why they're doing this is, it's cheaper not to engineer those stocks. There's fewer parts that they have to assemble, and that cuts their cost. But it doesn't make the driving experience better. My I guess epilogue to this is that I've had a few screen failures on my boat. I have 2 Teslas. I've had several screen failures and I had to drive the car with no screen. And so if I had not had a physical stock to change gears, I would not have been going anywhere, and that would have been a big problem. So.
Let's talk about the rest of the upgrades, though. For me, looking at it, it amounts to about half of what you'd see in a normal mid-cycle refresh, where automakers can take the opportunity to streamline assemblies, get cost out, provide a new look and materials and the same basic bones. So the S and X, the upgrades don't seem as dramatic as refreshes go on the exterior, and they're kind of 4 years behind when you might expect. So it seems a little late for an innovator like Tesla, although I think they've sort of flipped it as well. I will use an example or an analogy, it's like a candy bar, right? Like the packaging is as important as the Snickers bar inside. The Snickers bar is the part that's consistent. It's been consistent for however long you know what it's going to be. But the packaging changes. This is sort of different where, a 2012 Model S is going to feel a lot different to drive and operate than a brand new Model S. At least I imagine. Maybe I'm
build wise, it's going to be a lot better. That's for sure. You get into a 5-year-old Model S and it's falling apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the interesting stuff in Teslas is under the skin. The engineering is very clever. It's very there's a lot of stuff to geek out about in there. So I don't know if it's good or bad that they've kept the wrapper kind of similar. The analogy does fall apart to a certain degree because Tesla is what it is, and by being so recognizable, that's not necessarily a bad thing. They are going to have to take a really big leap the next time they restyle, when there's a fully new Model S, it's going to have to be a big change. So the incremental change here with the interior, I think, the screens, what do you think of they've gone away from portrait to landscape?
I think the Model S is a beautiful car. I think it's dated really well. I think it absolutely can go another 5 or 7 years. I really do. And, it seems superficial, but the switch from chrome to black trim, if you look at this car, I'm looking at the configurator right now. It feels fresh. It's beautiful. The interior it's radically different than anything else. They had to go to landscape mode because you can't, if you want to watch a movie, if you have 4 models, the more expensive models have to match or surpass the experience in the cheaper ones. And in the Model 3, when you're charging, you watch Netflix or video, you got this beautiful big wide portrait landscape mode, and so the S and X needed to match that. And I think the screen's a little bit bigger. Is it bigger in the S and X? It looks great.
It's not clear if it's what size it is. I don't think they actually said what size it is, whether it's a 15 or 17. It actually looks like it's a 15, like the 3 and the Y.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, actually, the two things that have gone unspoken in the refresh is that your luxury models have a traditional instrument cluster binnacle over the steering wheel, and your cheaper ones don't. So that's basically an admission that luxury buyers expect, demand, and deserve that secondary display, which is in fact, sorry, Tesla fans, safer. It's safer to have your eye gaze track down for a millisecond to check your speed than it is to track right and down. So I'm glad. And it's also safer for anyone who is really obsessed with their Tesla. If you must look at the situational awareness display to see what your car sees, which is the lane lines and other vehicles, it's a lot safer to be glancing down straight down rather than down to the right. So that's one thing. The other thing, and I would be dying to know, mate, our expert Sam might know, is does the SNX refresh include a cabin-facing camera? Because the Y and 3 do.
We don't know.
Because that's the big. Yeah. That would be the big admission by Tesla that some form of driver monitoring is coming and has to come, because Euro NCAP standards for DMS systems will require, if you want a 5-star safety rating in Europe, you're going to have a driver monitoring system. It's got to be camera based. So,
except that, the 3 and the Y only use an RGB camera. They don't use an infrared camera, which means that if you're wearing sunglasses, or, even at night, sometimes it's going to have trouble actually detecting, but certainly if you're wearing sunglasses.
Now you're assuming, of course, that the systems will be required to do gaze tracking as opposed to just head pose and hand position.
That's true. Yeah. So, but I think almost every other manufacturer is going with an infrared camera system.
I
that's
suspect
pretty much the standard.
That this is why you're the three of you doing real journalism and comparing these systems in the future is going to become an important aspect of measuring actual safety, or whether or not there is a safety improvement having a camera-based DMS present. Because systems that do proper, as you point out, gaze tracking and can see through glasses are going to be safer. Or they'll be capable of being safer, because the other half of the equation is what the system does once notified of a suboptimal gaze. But that's a whole nother episode.
Yeah, I mean, does it rumble your seat like the Cadillac does, or just shake the steering wheel or give you a little beep?
So all these Tesla fans claiming that DMS is stupid are going to have to eat crow once Tesla activates, presumably, the cabin-facing camera that is in the SNX, because your luxury model can't be less safe than your cheaper model. It can't be lacking some critical safety feature. So.
It'll also be interesting to see how well these systems learn, because I was like that stupid coffee cup that can show up in I've been driving for 10 minutes if I'm doing something really aggressive, but safe, on a quiet road or something. And so it needs to be able to learn, because if you see that coffee cup or whatever signal, if you get that repetitively, you're just going to ignore it. You're going to try and turn it off. It's not going to mean anything. And so there needs to be some kind of a learning aspect to it as well, to say, hey, you know what, this person lives in a particular environment where this is how they drive, or this is how they operate the vehicle. And I don't know how it judges safety or whatever, but it'll just be interesting to see how that happens.
So there is an interesting thing about DMS, camera-based DMS, is that some companies have large and growing databases of human behavior, human factors research, and some research is more than others. And so what you have is, depending on the type of system, I'm not going to break down the companies because I'm not even fully familiar with what all the different approaches are, but there is one approach is to create a fixed set of rules of behavior. So a person's head moves this far this way, they must not be paying attention. If the person's hand moves here, they must be distracted towards something. That is one way to do it. But there are systems being prototyped today that create an individualized baseline. So the user of the system, their inputs are X, the outputs are Y. This is what the environment looks like. And they just happen to hold their head this way. That's just how they drive. They just happen to look over here. Because there's physical behavior is a little bit different. And so creating a baseline per user and integrating that with their inputs and what the car sees and and the outcomes over time, I think that's going to be the future of really great driver monitoring systems.
Yeah, I think so
and
too.
Actually, that's something that Genesis, the G80 and the GV80 are starting to do. If you look in the specs, one of the things they mentioned in there, and actually Hyundai announced this about a year and a half ago, was this idea of adding machine learning into the adaptive cruise control system. And what they're actually doing is it's trying to learn each driver's behavior. So for a particular driver, if they are consistently, accelerating up, or trying to get a little bit closer, or trying to, or backing off, for cut-ins and things like that, they're looking for what the driver is doing and trying to replicate that with the automatic control. So using a machine learning algorithm and making adjustments to the default control based on what that driver's expectation is, essentially trying to do what Brian talks about all the time with naturalistic driving behavior, but tuning it to the individual driver as opposed to tuning, your automated driving system to the behavior around, in a particular area where you're driving.
I mean, that's pretty great for an owner to just step out of the car and be like, wow, that thing drives like me.
Yeah.
Ideally.
But to your point, Alex, that idea of trying to better learn the driver's behavior and in simple, in fairly rudimentary ways, this is something that, that these systems have been trying to do for a long time. The early driver monitor systems, the coffee cup systems, one of the things I remember when Ford first launched theirs, and I think the Mercedes system that launched before that was similar, is it looks for a pattern of steering input behavior, and, using a fairly basic PID controller system. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but basically, using some calculus to figure out, okay, what is typical for this driver, and then when it sees a deviation from that, that's when it triggers and says, okay, this might be something that we need to alert the driver about.
All right. Wow.
Like I said, this is why I love this show. I love a show where I learn something by coming on. Thank you.
Now that we've talked automated driving to death, before we get to a listener question, I would like to touch on some news that came out of the UK this week from a company that is completely the opposite of this, which is Lotus. Lotus announced that this year they will be ceasing production of the Elise, the Exige, and the Evora. The Elise is now 25 years since it launched, and sometime later this year they're going to launch their new sports car, the Type 131, which apparently will be their last ever internal combustion vehicle. After that, it's they're also launching the Evija this year. But that after whatever this Type 131 is, it's going to be all electric.
So I love the title of this release, though. A new year and a new future. New Lotus sports car series confirmed. Elise, Exige, is that how you say
Exige.
it? Exige. And Evora embark on a final year of production. Like, they make it so positive, as opposed to saying we're canceling all this crap and moving on. like the positive spin on this is fabulous. So kudos to that headline writer.
Well, Morgan just announced the end of three-wheeler production.
Really? Oh.
And but again, but one more year of a special edition can be yours.
Are you going to get one?
Sorry?
Do you still have your Morgan?
Yeah. I mean, let's not talk. I love that car. I mean, I'll do anything to keep these companies in business, except buy another one.
You did your part. You
That's
bought
awesome.
one. Now it's up to somebody else.
Actually, I've owned 3 Morgan three-wheelers in 10 years. Don't ask me why. The first 2 were problematic, but this one is as perfect as an 11,000-mile 9-year-old car can be. But we're here to talk about Lotus.
Yeah. Well, so I was pleased to see that they've apparently figured out the whole Brexit thing, and they're adding jobs, which is good because that was
250 jobs. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an industry uncertainty about what they're going to do. And we've seen, because they've now finalized things, there's some jobs. I think Nissan as well is moving some jobs into their UK operations that they were going to previously source elsewhere. You know, the batteries or motors, I forget exactly what it is. So maybe this is the same kind of thing where some of these moves are predicated by their trade situation. But also the Exige, the Evora, and the Elise were old. So they were due for a refresh anyway. Do we know if the Type 131 is going to be similar to the Lotuses that we know and love, or are they going to be significantly different?
Well, have you seen a picture of them?
No,
I haven't.
It looks like more of the same. It looks like it looks like a refreshed Evora. So I don't know if I love it, but I do love that Lotus exists. Have y'all driven one of these?
Oh yeah. My engineering career, after I graduated, my first job out of school, I went to work for what was then Delco Moraine NDH. As part of GM, working on ABS. My first assignment was working on ABS for the M100 Elan, and also supporting the Esprit X180R race program. So I dove into the deep end with Lotus. I mean, even when I was still in school, long before I got that job, I was always a fan of Lotus. I was a fan of Colin Chapman, and his willingness to take chances, take a flyer on wild ideas. Like some of the Formula One cars, some of the race cars, and just that whole ethos of simplicate and add lightness. Take complexity out of the car, make it lighter. And sometimes you went a little too far. The whole probably apocryphal story of having a Formula One race car, tube frame race car. Keep taking tubes out of the structure until it collapses, and then add that last one back.
Have you looked at the what is it? The big one, the Evija?
The Evija?
The Evija, this thing is really cool. I mean, I'm always rooting for Lotus because and I love Koenigseggs and Paganis and all these other things, but they do strip these things down to the core driver's car, and they're really cool. And I've driven an Elise, an older one, and it's really great. I mean, it's really
I did a review of the Exige 260R. Back in 2009, I think, for Autoblog, and I was lucky in that early time at Delco. I actually got to spend some time with Roger Becker, and in just a few hours in the car with Roger, I learned more about vehicle dynamics than I think I did in 5 years of engineering education. And it was always a blast getting to work on those cars.
Yeah, so, I mean, if you see this Evija in person, it's much smaller than you think. Mm-hmm. And the person who buys a Lotus is always someone I'd like to meet.
Yeah.
And you can't say that for a lot of other supercars.
I was actually seriously tempted earlier this week. There was an M100 Elan on Bring a Trailer, about 100,000 miles on it. And it was, at the time, the bid was like $8,600. And have you ever driven one of those Elans?
No.
They are actually shockingly good to drive. I mean, despite being a front-wheel drive car, it's actually it's got an amazing chassis in it. And somebody on Twitter was speculating, gee, would a Type R engine fit in that thing? And that would be really interesting to put a Type R engine. Although probably the biggest mechanical weakness of those Elans was the cooling system. If they were left sitting idling for too long, they did have a tendency to overheat, especially in
That sounds like a Lotus.
summer days.
Well, all Anna Morgan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Lotus is two separate
designed for
companies.
English weather.
Well, they're not really two separate companies, but Lotus Engineering and Lotus the automaker, they go forward doing different things. Do you anticipate there's a day where Lotus is no longer making automobiles, or do they fully embrace EVs and like a driver's EV that doesn't have lots of screens and doesn't have lots of the tech that EVs are typically sold with now? They're premium in a different way. They're premium for, you get less of what you typically get in more of a driver's car still, just with EV propulsion. So what's maybe the future looking like for Lotus?
I hope that's the direction to go. That would be kind of cool.
I was dreaming. Yeah.
I predict Lotus will, as a brand, will survive forever.
Well, now they're owned by Geely now, so
So I believe that OEMs will bifurcate into the pieces that manufacture autonomous pods, and then I'll just take I'm trying to get an example. You can take Ford, or GM. What are the models they make that have to live for the brand to matter? Mustang, Corvette. They have to. It doesn't matter if they sell one or a gazillion. F-150. There's a brand there, and Jeep. A Jeep that's an important brand, and so. Once you get to skateboard powertrain ubiquity, you're going to see every manufacturer make pods, and then they're going to make their valuable their Halo brand vehicle on that skateboard, and then they're going to have to quintuple down on design around it. My theory I wrote a column about this that was satirical years ago, but it's becoming true. My review of the 2036 Porsche 911, which I wrote 5 years ago, people still come back to me from OEMs saying how much they love it. Because one of the ideas was that on board the vehicle, you'd have a database of every Porsche 911 ever made on board with the sound, the gear ratios, and the handling balance. And that you could then just select the year and the package. And then you'd have a virtual manual transmission that would replicate the ratios, and the changes, and the car would just match up. The performance would match up with your selection. You could drive a simulator. It would basically you're driving a real world simulator of every Porsche ever made. And the way to replicate the handling balance, you could actually physically replicate some of the handling balance by having a piece of a section of the battery would be on a rail, which could move forward or rear in the vehicle to further replicate the good old days. And beyond that, because you would have modeled the grip and the physics of the car perfectly, you'd have your extended safety envelope. The car would not allow you to crash. It just would not. And
that sounds very appealing to me. You've seen that kind of thing happen. I know you're big on the audio side. So for decades now, for 20 years, audio companies have been emulating the sound of gear from the 50s and 60s and 70s. So you can buy plugins that go into your digital audio workstation that supposedly sound like hardware from the 60s. And it's gotten better and better and better, especially with the convolution emulation technology and stuff. And this is audio only, but that's not a terrible idea.
It's not.
Well, they do the same thing in photography too. I mean, I've got apps that can take my digital photo from my Canon DSLR and make it look like Kodachrome or Ektachrome or Ilford HP film, or anything else. So this replicating old analog technology is a interesting idea. I don't know how appealing it's actually.
Here's the thing: I don't know how many people are going to do it, but it's going to be a selling point. At the end of the day, people want brand, they want authenticity. They want to know that they can go to a dealership and pay extra to be told that a guy in England had his hands on this thing. and that thing could have a skateboard. It doesn't matter what it has, but that thing is different from the thing that the guy in France touched. And that's what people pay for. It doesn't matter if it's food or perfume or whatever, or a car, and that there was a human being who made a decision.
I'm here for the explosion of design and brand and personality. I'm down. Let's go. Let's do it.
Let's a listener question here from Tristan Ollie. Says he's a big fan of the podcast. He lives near Boston, so it's always fun to hear about Dan and Rebecca's New England adventures. He has a multi-part question for you about connectivity in newer vehicles.
Oh, boy.
It seems like more and more cars are relying on built-in connectivity to power different features of the vehicle. Tesla has done it for a while. It's over 8 years now since the Model S. The new Mach-E, and now all cars that will be based on Android Automotive. If you're buying any of these vehicles, once they are 5 years old or past the complimentary length of included internet service, how much will it cost per month for the internet connection? As someone who really does not want another monthly bill, how much functionality will you lose if you don't subscribe to that data? Are future cars going to need an internet connection to function? Related to that, have automakers talked about their plans for long-term support of these platforms? Android phones are notorious for being bad about getting updates once they're more than 2 years old. What's a 15-year-old car with Android Automotive going to be like? Are updates going to be pushed out by Google or Volvo? What worries me is that a lot of these features these cars have now just won't work down the road. Netflix and Hulu no longer work on a lot of older smart TVs because they've not been updated and can't support the newer versions of the services. Annoying with the TV, but more concerning when it comes to a car.
That's a lot to unpack there.
So let me answer one part of this first, which is, yes, some of these features, once you reach the end of that complimentary connectivity service, you will have to pay to continue using those features. Super Cruise being one of those. That's one of the first that we've seen. GM gives you 3 years of OnStar service with the purchase of the car. After that, if you don't sign up for a $25 a month OnStar plan, Super Cruise will stop working because it can no longer get map updates. So that is a serious problem, and this is something that manufacturers are going to have to address, is how they pay for this stuff. Because it costs money to do to develop these updates and validate them, test them and validate them. So, Alex, as the owner of a Model 3, what do you?
Well, do you have
the premium connectivity package on your car?
I do. I do have it. I forget what it costs. It's fairly inexpensive. I'm going to say, when you buy an Apple, you do get OS updates. They happen because system stability, and security over time requires these updates. So there has to be some, at the very least, code maintenance for these systems. I guess there is a lot to unpack here. I would like to see manufacturers, I hope they do what I think is the right thing, which is, as the state of the art changes, if a software update is possible, if it's a safety related thing, I would hope that they would just update it. If it's convenience, then people probably should pay for it, because luxury and safety, two different things. Safety should never be a luxury. It should be table stakes. So it's a personal opinion. It's a personal opinion. So
no, I totally understand what Tristan's talking about. The idea of yet another bill, especially for something that is integral to the car. And Alex is right. There is a difference between safety and just convenience features or something. So I think it is something that we have to figure out as an industry. I had an interesting experience that I will not elaborate on too much, but when I had the Ford Mustang Mach-E this week and actually had a lot of issues with the infotainment system, I had the privilege and luxury of talking directly to senior people at Ford Engineering about it. And we had a conference call on it. And we think that it was actually related to the version of the Android Auto that Android phone that I'm using, which is 2.5 years old, and the Android Automotive, which is different. The the programming, which is different than using Android Auto. But basically the maps wouldn't work. I couldn't get any navigation to work, and the car I just got frozen screens. It worked about 12 hours after, when the car kind of reset itself, and then I didn't have any issues for that day. But so to Tristan's question, yeah, I think and part of it was blamed on bad Wi-Fi signal, which I am notorious at my house, which is why I still have landlines. Because when I do radio interviews, I can't depend upon my Wi-Fi signal. But it was an ongoing issue that happened for almost a good 4 or 5 hours of an afternoon with the car. So, we have to figure out a way to fix these kinds of issues. Ford actually does have a way to provide feedback. So if you don't have somebody like Jim Farley on speed dial saying, "Hey, I'm having problems with this," you can actually, you can provide feedback, which they got immediately. And it was great because it was, that specific VIN number, that particular car. And they said, they had all the reports, and the feedback screens in the Ford Sync system are actually very, very good. So you're able to provide some pretty specific feedback.
The idea that the car is using Wi-Fi for things isn't terrible to me. I'm not thrilled with the extra monthly bill. It's going to depend on what that cost is, because it's not like it's a phone. So you need a limited feature set. They're going to need to work with the provider to figure out what is that tier of service, what does it cost, and there's going to come a point where the thing is obsolete. I mean, that's a problem now, where we've got such connected devices and like smart TVs is a great example. If the rest of the TV works, but you can't use half of the functions or important things that especially if you bought a smart TV because it's a smart TV, and now it doesn't work because the hardware is too old, you hate to throw away a thing that functions. It's no longer supported because of its hardware version. I don't know if there's hardware patches for cars that can continue to move that along. There's a repair culture in other parts of the world that we don't necessarily have here, where things are more expensive and they keep them running longer, and they fix them when they break versus replace them. I think we're going to see more of that here as this stuff spreads out, and we rely on the features and we rely on the actual connectivity to make the thing work for us on a day-to-day basis. It's going to need to be figured out because cars are expensive, man. I can't be buying one every 7 years. Like, it just doesn't work for me. It's got to be viable.
And to what Tristan said, mentioned, that idea of, the smart TV. This is why, in my house, I have a Chromecast on each TV in the house, because, I have a TV across the room from me here that is a 10-year-old TV that actually has no smarts in it at all. I've got, a couple other ones upstairs that, each one of them has a Chromecast on it. It's a $35, $50 device. I can swap those out, which I think is nice, because I've had other devices hooked up to these. I've got, a couple of old Rokus, sitting on a shelf in the workshop here that are too old, that no longer get software updates. I've even got an older Chromecast that no longer gets software updates. So, I think one of the things that manufacturers need to do is they need to go down this path of making the cars upgradable, hardware upgradable for a reasonable cost. And this is something, I remember seeing a couple of years back. Qualcomm at a show I was at was showing off a version, showing off a system where the Snapdragon chip that was powering the infotainment system in this car was on a module that could easily be unplugged, replaced with a newer one with a newer chip, more power, more memory, whatever, and newer connectivity. And I think this is something I've written about several times over the years, this idea that we need to design cars for that upgradability, because, if you've got a vehicle that can last 15, 20 years or more, it's not acceptable for major functions to stop working after 3 or 4 years because it's not, either the software can't be updated or it's not being updated. We need to be able to keep that stuff going. And I agree with Alex, certain things like security fixes and, recalls and things like that, that has to be provided free of charge. That's not acceptable for those to be charged for. Even if you're not subscribing, you should still be getting, cybersecurity fixes and certain other types of fixes free of charge. Certain functions like Super Cruise or, whatever other brand, manufacturer has. Yeah, that can require a subscription after a period of time. But I think the manufacturers need to be much clearer up front that, okay, you're getting this feature, you're going to have it for 3 years. And then after that, you're going to have to pay a subscription fee to continue using it. And I think that's acceptable as long as you're transparent about it from the time the person buys the car. If they buy the car expecting that function to work for the life of the car, like the air conditioning did or your power windows did on your 10-year-old car.
What would be nice is if manufacturers, for example, my Morgan, would say, hey, after 3 years, this thing is going to be like a paperweight. And it has no electronics, the mechanical part. That would be nice. Yeah.
Well, so I'm curious, like, this is one of the things that Tesla has gotten whacked for that I don't feel is necessarily fair, where if it gets traded in, they'll reset it and the next owner can buy the features they want a la carte.
Well, to be clear, just to clarify, when you buy when you get a Tesla, lease, buy whatever, so autopilot functionality, so your driver assistance is baked in. That's part of the car. And and cybersecurity baked in. And so you will just get updates for that forever. And whoever buys the car will get updates to those things. It's the premium connectivity specific to and full self-driving. Those are the things which you may lose if you transfer ownership. And presumably when they have a subscription program, you stop paying, you don't get those things. So the stuff that Tesla makes you pay for is not essential. The premium connectivity is not essential to basic vehicle function.
Right. And you're going to annoy some people. BMW also got whacked where they started charging for CarPlay and they backed off of that. But again, neither of those things are essential. And so I feel like they're going to have to get over that hump of acceptance. And then it's just going to be how things are.
The thing about CarPlay, though, is it should be baked in because it costs nothing. What does it cost to implement that?
Well, I don't know if there's a license fee they have to pay to Apple. I would be shocked if there wasn't.
Well, on some vehicles, they don't have nav built in. And so then in some ways it is kind of essential. If you want a navigation system that works well and safely, as opposed to listening to your car or phone or looking down at your phone for Waze or Google Maps or something. So I think it depends on the vehicle.
This is exactly why most of the companies developing AVs, are focusing on fleet-owned vehicles, not on technology for individual consumers to buy, because there's this understanding that these, unlike vehicles of the past, these vehicles are going to require updates throughout their life cycle, and that does cost money. And the challenge of how do you get consumers to pay for that? Do you get them to pay once up front, which might be an exorbitant amount of money over the life of the vehicle? Do you require them to have a subscription? This is a challenge that the industry is struggling with. And at least for, these robo-taxi type vehicles, or delivery vehicles, they are going to be in fleets because that's somewhere where, you're going to have a recurring revenue stream. And you can bake that into the cost of that service. The cost of, the support can be baked into the cost of that service, much like, you see Adobe, doing now with Creative Suite. They're baking the cost of the updates into that subscription model.
Let me tell you, there was a lot of people who hate that idea.
Well, to be fair, as an Adobe customer and someone who works in the autonomous vehicle space, I don't yet. The Adobe model doesn't thrill me because the basic tasks of performing of graphic design could be performed perfectly well with a 10 or 20-year-old installation of the Creative Suite. But safety is something which is always improving. And the goal of 100% is probably almost certainly unattainable, but every day you want to be moving closer to it. So the enormous costs, as Sam pointed out correctly, of getting there, it's always going to be there. We're always going to be investing in improving safety technology. And therefore, there's always going to be a cost associated with updating that hardware and software to get safer every day. And that's why the commercial fleet ownership model makes sense. And the notion that one could spend $10,000 to buy extra as an option on a car that you buy today, that gets you in the door for autonomous technology forever makes no sense. Because on the other side of that, the company that starts with a T is going to be, they're going to have to be investing forever, Tesla, in trying to make their systems safer. And there are ongoing costs, and logically you want to pass them on down to somewhere. And so, of course, Tesla wants to get a subscription model because he needs some way of paying for the ongoing R&D to keep improving the system.
Well, at a certain point too, like you as the manufacturer, if you're liable for keeping those things up, you need to sunset that old hardware. There comes a point where how long is long enough to support that stuff? And then how do you transition those owners to newer versions?
Another reason why a commercial fleet ownership of autonomous vehicles is the model of anyone who is sane and rational, for the first and probably several generations of vehicles. Someday that could change. But if you look at the rumors that go on the internet around Tesla updates, like there was rumored a guy, Green the Only on Twitter is one of these accounts who picks apart his Tesla. He opens up, looks at the code, and he found that they're talking about updating sensors. So of course, updating sensors, because the current generation of Teslas on the road, as Sam has pointed out, going back 5 years, the hardware has limitations. It has limitations. And someday, every year, better hardware is going to come out. And you're going to want to implement that. And you're going to have to attach software for it. And then the bar for safety is going to go even higher. So the notion of permanence in technology makes no sense. The notion of permanent evolution makes perfect sense. And there's costs associated with it.
Here. I agree with that. All right. It's been, let's see, it's 11 a.m. It's been an hour and 52 minutes. I think we should wrap it up and let everybody get to their mornings and let our listeners have a rest before they wind up with the next episode, because these are value-packed shows here in the Church of Wheel Bearings.
Value-packed. And if you want to hear No Parking, check us out on noparkingpodcast.com. And Ground Truth, the URL is groundtruthautonomy.com.
Go add them to your RSS, podcatchers.
Thanks, Alex.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to Wheel Bearings. Hey, we love to listen to our listeners, too. Drop us an email to feedback@wheelbearings.media with your thoughts, questions, or conversation starters. That's feedback@wheelbearings.media. You can also find us on Twitter @WheelBearingsCast. Don't use any vowels except for the A in cast. So that's WHLBRNGS cast. Thanks again. We hope to hear from you soon.